What's up, everybody? Welcome to TFS number 26. I don't know if you can hear the bird outside, but it's singing because it's raining. It's nice. It's very nice. Very refreshing. Can you read my emotions? What am I feeling? That's one of the subjects for today. But of course, first and foremost, I'm going to talk about space exploration, or rather, space colonization, and why it might not be such a great thing after all. Pretty sure this article comes from Nautilus. But, before I launch into that, actually, let's talk about the term political scientist, which I stumbled across in this article. And to me, political scientist is a job description that would be better as political philosopher, because there's really no such thing as political science. Politics deals in concepts and ethical ideation. It's entirely in the metaphysical realm. Sure, there's some correlation to policy decisions and also polling and statistics and, incorporating geography and things of that nature, resource availability. But all in all, the main business of it happens on the philosophical level. And I think this is a prime example of how this modern obsession with making everything scientific misses the strength of philosophy and oftentimes misidentifies philosophy with science to the detriment of both. So, anyway, why colonizing space isn't wise? First, let's talk about reasons for colonizing space, which were given by all sorts of people from Elon Musk to Neil deGrasse Tyson to Steven Pinker. So it would stimulate the economy, it would inspire the next generation to do science, and it would safeguard us against catastrophes that happen here on planet Earth, like an asteroid impact, for instance. And it's imperative to the survival of the species for those reasons. And also, it would let us harness, astronomical numbers of resources, which might help us to create a utopia, or at least help us greatly to take steps towards something of that sort. And there was also kind of a thing mentioned of a moral imperative to do so because it means that we would be able to reproduce more and make more people. And more people obviously means more wonderful people that would invent and do art and all sorts of stuff. So let's get out there and start making space babies, apparently. Now let's start with the old turd in the punch bowl. Reasons against colonizing space. And I like the turd in the punch bowl. I think it gives it an extra spice. Alright. So, divergent evolutionary types will arise in novel environments and is likely to lead to conflict due to misunderstandings. So, let me break down a little note I made there. What happens is when you go to another planet or that you're like on a space station, it's a different environment, which over time would create different traits. And those different traits would, lead to different ways of thinking. And even before the different traits emerge, you just have different ways of thinking. So that's, an area that's rife for conflict and misunderstanding. And, there's not just a natural selection processes that would go on to change traits, because once we become spacefaring civilizations, our technology will have expanded. And so cyborgization, as this author puts it, would be more likely to influence these evolutionary trajectories on other planets and spacecraft than natural selection, which would lead to some really wonky stuff because people with certain augmentations and a genetic kind of tinkering would display behaviors that we would really never have seen before, and so there's some wonky stuff. Yeah. And so the evolutionary divergence, whether it's man-made or it comes from natural selection, coupled with, ideological divergence, which I already mentioned would happen, would result in like mega conflict to the nth degree. And it would create, a greater likelihood of the security dilemma, which is basically the arms race where people try to predict the motivations of others and escalate their amount of force to back up their claims and their rights in kind of a tit for tat in a sort of Cold War. And he kind of talked about a philosophical concept which I like. So here's, if you already know about this, then it would have helped you understand. But if you're just coming to the knowledge of it now, Hobbes's Leviathan concept, which is basically comes from his book, I think, from that name, and it's the theory of government by the consent of the governed in order to secure rights in a conflict-prone world. Now, instituting that in, space would be nearly impossible because of the logistic problems of a spacefaring civilization to do force projection. So enforceability would be pretty much impossible just due to the vast distances and the number of species and things. So the number of actors would make deterrence, like we have nuclear deterrence, impossible because that deterrence, relies on very easily and very strictly defined actors that you can trust to an extent and understand to an extent. But if there's this whole Wild West free-for-all, this is inevitably going to happen in space, deterrence won't work because there will just be too much going on. So his conclusion was we should do a pre-mortem analysis, meaning that before things start escalating into these crazy places, we should try to mitigate them by studying this problem kind of in the same way that he's already done by laying out these potential trouble points. Now, I asked at the beginning about my emotions, and could you read them? Because right now I'm honestly probably feeling emotions, but I'm not registering them. I feel very, very flat because I'm very, very tired. Long, hard days at work, taking care of the house, taking care of relatives. So I'm a bit flat. But am I accurate in reading that emotion? Are you accurate in reading that emotion? And even if you are, is it because of your ability to read an emotion, or is it just like a guess? That's the question the following article answers. So, in my opinion, this article kind of proves the point, like yesterday's article that I shared, that all of these kind of glib psychological taxonomies, classifications, ways of breaking people's situations down are bunk. They're pop psych, even if they're couched in a tradition of serious psychological, clout in terms of the people that propagated them and the sort of supports that they came up for them. So this article is basically a critique of the concepts outlined in David Goldsman's 1995 book, Emotional Intelligence. Goldman's, by the way, not Goldsman. So, in emotional intelligence is based on two assumptions. The first is that it's possible to detect emotions of people accurately. And the second is that emotions are automatically triggered by events in the world and you can learn to control them through rationality. Now, as far as the author was concerned, and she's a psychologist, and she also, references other people's work, neither of these assumptions stand up scientific scrutiny in the age of neuroscience. Copious research, and a lot of what I'm reading and saying right now is just, quotes and paraphrases from the author's lab and other people, shows that faces and bodies alone do not communicate any specific emotion in any consistent manner. So there's no consistency in the way that any given emotion is displayed. And I was reminded of reading Antonio Damasio's works on, the feeling brain, on emotions and consciousness. Well, this is the statement that this author made. The brain does not have separate processes for emotion and cognition, and therefore one cannot control the other. So they work in concert, in tandem. Damasio had basically said that, your brain uses emotions to select from a wide range of options that if it, logically did that process instead of using, kind of emotion as a limbic catalyst for making a decision, you'd just be sat there forever, for instance, deciding who to marry out of all of the people that it was possible to marry, etc. So, body language is bunk, apparently, because happy people don't always smile and you don't always puff your chest out when you're feeling proud or accomplished, and sad people don't always frown. Scowling, everybody knows that scowling could be a number of things. It could be, sometimes you scowl when you're thinking really hard, or you scowl when you're, I can't scowl very well. Or you scowl when you're angry. So sometimes you scowl because you're trying to hold in a fart. So there isn't any emotion that has a specific consistent expression, as already been said. And this was highlighted when a lecturer is replacing people's faces to record their muscle movements. It's seen that they move in different ways, not one consistent way, when their owners feel the same emotion. So basically, reading emotions in people is guesswork, which is why I've always been so infuriated by folks that I've stumbled across in just general conversation and who have been employers or customers or things. And they're always, very, very sure that they've read me correctly and address me in this kind of like manner that I'm like, that's not at all where I was coming from, dude. You need to calm down. So, that whole triune concept of you have the mammalian brain, the reptilian brain, and all that seems to be bunk because your brain develops and works in concert to tailor itself to needs. It's all about wiring. And this is getting at the modern theory of how the brain functions, which is called construction. And it's the idea that your brain creates all thoughts, emotions, and perceptions automatically and on the fly as needed for a given situation, which sort of makes sense, but sort of, in my opinion, doesn't. But again, I do not have the time or knowledge requisite to go into that at this point, so I'll just leave it be. And basically, your brain is designed, to keep homeostasis going and to make sure that you survive in your environment. And it does this by predicting. And so it makes these predictions from prior experiences, and that's just guesswork. And your guesswork can be improved. So there is such a thing as emotional intelligence in terms of being able to improve that guesswork. And it would come generally from a greater emotional vocabulary built of words and experiences, some of which come from manufacturing varied emotional states. And that's, emotional granularity is kind of when you have this great vocabulary of emotions, this repertoire. It's having those options. So you can scowl in anger, you can stew silently in anger, you can bond in anger. It's finally tailoring your emotions and behaviors to a specific situation. And the author says, the more emotions you know, the more finely your brain can construct emotional meaning automatically from other people's actions. Even though your brain's always guessing, when it has more options to guess with, the odds are better it'll guess appropriately. And interestingly, adults who exhibit higher emotional granularity tend to be healthier with fewer doctor's visits, less medication, and shorter stays in the hospital. Which, since we're talking about how, your brain is there to keep homeostasis going, well, that could be tied to why these people who have this greater emotional intelligence and can kind of adjust to situations better based on that spend less time in the hospital. So this gets to this vocabulary thing, which, to me, having to do with intelligence is, I sort of agree with that because I don't really very much like the whole IQ test approach because it's a very specific kind of situation and a very specific sort of problem solving. And, you can always expand your capacity to react and to put information together in new ways through learning new words and new concepts and new skill sets. And you can kind of adapt all of those. And that's what's going to make society great, not people that just out of the box can solve abstract problems of matching cubes and things. And I mean, people's IQs in the traditional sense vary in the same people depending on the environment. So, this kind of got me thinking along this little rabbit trail, because there was a last article I read about the poverty and intelligence and how it affects it. And those studies they did on the Indian farmers with the same exact person in a time of plenty got a completely different IQ score than in a time of, want, because cognitive space is taken up. And again, that cognitive space is affected by the number of interconnections you have, which can be affected by the number of words that you know, which, okay, maybe that takes a certain inherent, wiring that's there to begin with, but neuroplasticity seems to be a thing. And you can debate to what degree, but all in all, vocabulary has always been tied to intelligence, which is why I find it funny that people are always poo-pooing words in reading. It's like, okay, they're not just words. Words represent concepts, and the greater richness conceptually you have, the more you can understand and the more you can invent. It's like an engineer that only knows how to work on internal combustion engines but doesn't know anything about, electronics is limited. Anyway, take care, everybody. Thanks so much for listening. I know this was kind of very dry, but I have to keep on making this excuse. It's all that I have energy for at the moment. I have resources coming my way. I have a new desktop that should be arriving in a few days. And as I'm getting a handle on my living situation still with taking care of people, that's slowly and surely improving. So, yeah, thanks for bearing with me. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give this a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Also, my main website is fractaljournal.com, where you'll find stories, ideas, and more. Take care, everyone.